Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin. Today, I'm joined by Joe Kevens, who is the Director of Demand Gen at PartnerStack, and he's also the founder of B2B SaaS Reviews. And we're talking about SaaS reviews. So we touch a little bit on peer communities being overrated when it comes to software buying advice, and why review sites are just a bit sick and not terminal, and you still need them. So on to the episode. Hey, Joe, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dustin, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So we're going to dive into the world of reviews, which I think will be fun. But first, I want to start with something that maybe goes against the common gospel now in the marketing communities that you mentioned before, which is turning to peer communities for software buying advice is overrated. So let's kick that one off and dive into that.
Yeah. I think it has a lot of potential. It might even be the future when it comes to this. But I think at the moment, my view of why I think it's a tad overrated is, in large part, it's typically recommended by people that have large networks. So influencers that if they turn to the community, they'll get a pretty substantial response. But at least from my point of view, when I go to peer communities, and I'm in several of them, if I see an average Joe ask for feedback on a product or service, I typically see few responses, shallow responses, and a lack of context of who's responding. It's challenging to know company size, industry, what the role is. So you're getting a little snippet from someone without much context. So I think there's definitely a place for it. I think at the very top of the funnel, if you're just asking, hey, I'm having this problem, has anyone else in the community experienced it? That could be great to explore. And maybe that leads you down a path of a software or service, which would then lead you to a review site. Or maybe at the very bottom of the funnel, I think it's great to just do that back channel, side channel with a peer and say, I'm basically considering buying this tool. And then you have a in-depth one-on-one chat. And if you connect with someone and have a one-on-one chat like you and I are having, I think you would probably get more candid responses than you probably would see in a lot of reviews. Yeah, I think there's a place for it, but I think I've seen some go so far as to basically say review sites are done. The new way is to just turn directly to the peer community and ask. And I just don't think we're there yet. I don't think in my experience, I don't think there's the right amount of info, the right quality of info, and kind of the right context from who's providing that info.
Yeah, so I think it's tricky, right? Because people want that back channel authentic piece, but they don't always trust reference calls because it's a cherry picked person. There's probably 5 people on the list. And similarly, sometimes on review sites as well, a lot of them have become super gamified, right? Where they all say the same-ish thing and the reviews are either 4 or 5 stars, so you don't get a lot of value. So that's, I think, where people struggle. Like they're trying to get multiple data points to realize or to figure out, should I buy this software? Because if I get it wrong, who knows nowadays, it might cost you your job, right? Like it's a big decision to purchase software. So I'd like to hear from your point of view then, like you mentioned review sites have their issues. I think you said they're sick, but not terminal, which is an interesting way to put it. So let's dive into that. Like first, maybe what's wrong with a lot of them, and then how can people actually get that social proof they need?
Yeah, I think you hit 2 of the biggest nails on the head. I did a survey of B2B software buyers in the fall, and one of the questions was, what limits your use of business software review sites? And the top 2 were inflated ratings and a lack of authenticity. I think it was 50% of people that are using these sites are limiting their use of it because of a lack of authenticity. And then 49% from review inflation, which some have called kind of like 4.7 star syndrome. Or I think when you were talking to Sam about this on a previous episode, you were saying it seems like everyone's got the same rating. So I think, the rating, the value of ratings has decreased in large part because also if you ask buyers, do ratings matter? I think from the vendor point of view, or at least my point of view, ideally, you would hope they wouldn't matter much given all these problems, but the reality is they still do. A lot of vendors or buyers still say they are very important. So I think that's led to this cherry picking in a way to maximize review site ratings, where all vendors are now it's a moot point. You're more or less just getting to a point where your review rating is good enough to be considered. And then at least you're not losing on that ground. But for buyers, I think the ratings have gone down in terms of how much value they provide. And then authenticity, it's a major issue. AI is exacerbating it. Just saw a study the other day that there's been a spike in AI generated reviews. The review sites have been combating that and it's been going down, but it's still higher than it was pre-ChatGPT. Also, and I think you probably see this in the testimonial world too, there's just some buyer skepticism that was this kind of the vendor saying, here, go say this or about it, and it's not their true authentic point of view on the subject. So I think a lot of software buyers today are probably seeing reviews as skewed pretty heavily to the positive. And I think the sick part is particularly on the critical cons and gotchas of the software. I think that's where people say, I really have to side channel and talk to people directly because I'm probably not going to get a full story on a review site. So I think, those are some of the big ones. The other ones that came up would be, are reviewers relatable to me? Sometimes if there's not enough reviews, they would dismiss the review. So there are a few other issues that come up with them, but I think the big ones that keep coming up and up again are the rating inflation and then the authenticity piece.
Yeah, I think the authenticity side too, a lot of, I was going to say not that many, but actually a lot of the review sites are very much pay to play. Like the ones at the top have a different color button and someone paid to show up there, but the average person doesn't know that. So I think that's another issue that people run into.
Yeah, they do that.
Yeah, there's a few that do that as a marketer. So my skeptical approach to reading reviews, I'm curious your thoughts on this. And I think this is actually common. A lot of people do it is I search by worst rating and I read those first because I know that's the group of people who got pissed off enough to go leave a negative review. I know it's not like the actual representation, but I'm going to get some of those cons. And then I basically just read some of the longer 4 or 5 star reviews because I think I personally judge those as more authentic because someone took the time. And then I have to balance out like my judgment there, which I think it works okay. It takes up a ton of time to do that effectively. And I think a lot of people will just look and say, oh, they're above 4.5. Okay, cool. And just dismiss it. So how would you recommend people or buyers, how would you recommend they actually ingest reviews and what should they actually look for?
Yeah, I think I've dug into this a little bit and I think, along the lines of what you said and building on it, filtering for certain star ratings. So looking at the 1 and 2 stars, I think that provides that balance to the many 4 and 5 stars that are out there. I think just keep a critical eye, let's say, for if they probably have an axe to grind or there's something that really irritated them that sometimes it can be a little bit emotionally charged, but still definitely worth checking. I think, in my opinion, if you could find like 3-star reviews that are in depth, that's the dream because that's someone who's taking a balanced approach that is neither basically fully advocating for them, but also not completely dismissing them. And that's where you can get the balance of the pros and cons. So even if you could find the 2s and 4s and get the best approach, I think the other thing to do would be leverage the other filters on the sites that you can. And if there's enough reviews, if it's a bigger tool, see if you could find someone who's relatable to you. So use company size, use industry, and hone in on that. Because I think one of the biggest challenges, both for buyers and vendors, is just the sheer quantity of reviews. And a lot of people say, what's the point of getting 10,000 reviews? No one's going to go read more than even 10. One thing that a little bit of quantity does provide is you can hone in on kind of people that are most relatable and filter down like you have, even filter down to like the ones that are more in depth, which is another point. You could also basically brush up on the review sites and maybe don't just immediately click on the one that's the top rank. You can go down the list and have an informed opinion on what some of those bring. Some sites have more in-depth reviews in general than others. I think Gartner Digital Markets, for example, Capterra is the old guard, and they tend to have quite shallow reviews. Or if you really want to pick out more in-depth reviews, I think there are review sites like TrustRadius and PeerSpot that are a bit more niche, but if there's enough reviews in your category that you're looking at, they do tend to ask more questions and dive deeper than others. Sometimes it's picking the right review site as well. And I think last but not least is don't rely on it alone. I hyper focus on reviews in what I cover, but by no means do I see it as a silver bullet. I think it's one piece of the buying process, one source of information, but lean on your peer community. As much as I said, I think it's overrated. It's still worth doing in addition to looking at review sites. Partners are a good source. They're a trusted source. They use all sorts of tools and give you intel on what it's like to work with multiple tools. Yeah. And just take it with a bit of a grain of salt as well.
Yeah. No, I think those are all good tips. Really, it's the whole social proof picture you need to figure out. And
Yeah.
Like, yeah, and actually ingest. And some of it is, the way I view it, as the volume of reviews is to me, a bit of a checkboxy thing. I totally agree on the filter size, but like my initial take is, this company has 3 reviews, I don't trust them, right? There's, for me at least, there's this limited threshold number they have to hit for me to view them as legitimate. And then from that point, then I'll invest the time to dig down. So I'm curious then, where it sounds like the focus on your end is like the quality of the reviews and the depth of the reviews. So I'm curious where you think general review sites are going to be going. Like you mentioned, Gartner Digital Market as being the old guard. Where are things going to go, and how do you think they get less sick? How do the review sites get a bit more healthy?
Yeah. I wish I had the answers. I'd probably make a lot more money if I did. But no, I think one important distinction of why quantity still matters, unfortunately, quite a bit, is all the review sites are in the business of ranking and mapping, generally speaking, vendors. And usually quantity does play into that. So as long as that's a factor, and I think that will continue to be a factor, because a lot of these sites do get traffic, or most of their traffic, from Google search. And I think to get Google the juice it needs, they like to generate lots of user-generated content. So quantity plays a role. And I think the other really big challenge for buyers and for sellers is, this also was something I found in my research, and others, I've seen other studies confirm it. Most software buyers will look at about 3 to 5 vendors. So even just making a short list is extremely challenging for buyers. Like, I had a look at the CRM category on G2. There's 684 vendors in it. As much as we can say how important it is to have quality and depth of reviews, the reality is no one's going to be reading through in-depth reviews of 684 vendors. There has to be a way to figure out which ones do you hone in on. And I think, for better and for worse, it's still an important role that review sites are playing today. It's basically helping buyers find categories to narrow the world, and then even further whittle it down to the 3 to 5 manageable set. But I think that is also where the opportunity is. There's a big part of how can they find better and different ways to recommend to a buyer which companies should they look for, right? Because I think oftentimes today it's skews to bigger companies that have lots of reviews and maybe have done a good job of getting high ratings. But I think where it could go and where it could be a lot better would be getting a better sense of who you are as a buyer and understanding more personalized recommendations. And maybe they're not the top 3 to 5 vendors that you would know. Maybe they're a little bit more obscure, but if you're more budget conscious, or if you're, in the right kind of target ICP for them, like you're in the right industry, right company size, that ultimately would probably be the right fit for you. Salesforce is not the best CRM for everyone, even though a lot of people suffer through it just because it's number one, right? But there's a lot of other options there. But I think today, trying to go figure out, okay, of the 684, how do I find which ones that aren't the obvious top 3 to 5? I think that's where there's a lot of kind of room for improvement. Maybe we'll see, I know they're experimenting some of these review sites with AI to try to get a little bit of a better sense of what's collectively been said about the vendors in the category, and then how can they match that with what a buyer's profile is and what they're looking for. But that's still all early days. But I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost, maybe a bad analogy, but almost like a travel agent approach, where they take in what you're looking to do, and then they pick and choose and mix and match. I did notice a little bit of that on, I think G2 has dipped their toes in there a little bit. I think Capterra did as well. I only remember it from the other side as like a marketer who could pay them for the leads to be recommended. So different, but I think that kind of highlights the potential issue here. Like, I agree that's ideal world. The issue is you have to find a company who isn't just in it for money and will farm out those top spots. It's going to have to take a company that wants to legitimately just provide value of pairing buyers with the correct software. So I think that's going to be the tricky part out there.
That, I think, that's, if there's a new entrant that's going to come disrupted, I think my bet would be on someone that builds it in a way that's almost like a social network, where it's two-sided. Vendor influence is removed from any sort of ranking or rating or influence. Maybe one day it's monetized through advertising, but the advertising would not be related to your standing or kind of position on the site. So I think there's a lot of potential there, but that's obviously a very big challenge to come in and do it. But yeah, maybe someone will come along.
Yeah, I'd be more likely to trust that. I think I skew to the far end of skeptical, probably more than most. So that's maybe the lens I'm looking at this through. But yeah, I do like that idea of more of a social network where it has a pairing component.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea that I haven't really seen with it before.
Yeah, I haven't seen any company do it. Maybe someone's building it. But I think in terms of skepticism, I think that's another important thing for marketers to keep in mind. I think marketers being so close to reviews are probably the most, I'd argue, are probably the most skeptical about reviews. Yeah. So maybe we're like the canary in the coal mine, and that's the way it'll go. But also, I think there's Google traffic is still increasing, and therefore the review sites are still dominating search. Most buyers are still turning to them, so they still play a very big role. I think for a lot of buying types, marketers are probably the ones that seem to be the ones that are now most skeptical, I'd say, just being so close to the process.
Yeah, no, I noticed that too with advertising, for example. Like know how, what's the saying? You like know how the sausage is made or whatever on the back end.
Yeah.
How creepy it actually is. Yeah. Whereas most people probably don't actually have that depth of knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And then last question here. Like I know we focus mostly on reviews. We did also briefly touch on that general, I don't know the best phrase for it, almost like social proof ecosystem that you have to build around a brand. Yeah. So like everything from having the right advocates who will organically advocate for you in those communities to having the minimum reviews to having customer stories. Curious how you think through all of that really. Like I know reviews are your focus, but curious just your general thoughts on how to think about that ecosystem of social proof.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to think the different types of kind of voice of the customer content. Reviews are just one. As much as I talk about it and focus on it, I think turning your reviews into kind of video customer stories and maybe even vice versa is an important part of it to bring those reviews to life in a way. There's just something about someone speaking about authenticity can often be missing with kind of a written review. I think people inherently trust it a little bit more if someone's willing to go on camera and speak to it. So yeah, I think going beyond reviews, I think testimonials, case studies, customer references, customer referrals, all the kind of acts of advocacy that a company could do. It's important to think through the range of voice of the customer activity there, and then also think through your buying process and how can you match that up. And then also look for the gaps in your own process, right? Maybe you've done a good job of generating reviews, but you only have a handful of case studies or no videos. Those are gaps to fill. And then also just with the buying process, it can get complex quick because using reviews can touch the whole top, middle, bottom of the funnel. But some of these formats of voice of customer work better in different places. Yeah, I think it's trying to get the voice of the customer in multiple different formats that can cover the buying process. And I think why that's so important, another key finding in the survey that I did, which lots of other surveys have found, is that there's decreasing trust in companies and what a company would say. It's the kind of indirect sources, customers, partners, even analysts, like those tend to be a little bit more trusted. So I think if you can tap into that as best you can and use their voice and get other people to say it for you more than you say it yourself in a variety of formats, that's probably where you can help your cause the most throughout the funnel.
Yeah, we always say you have to surround them with trust in like different areas. And I think there's things that add trust and there's things that diminish them, right? Like if you're pounding your audience with a really bad email sequence repeatedly, that's going to lower the trust. If you have good reviews, that's going to go up. So it's most people just refer to it as like your brand reputation, but essentially it is that like building trust around from all these components, I think is key, especially now where the market isn't like it was in 2021 where people could just buy whatever they want, throw money out. Now it's like a giant decision to make a purchase that, someone's job could potentially hedge on or depend on. Yeah. So I think trust is paramount, and I think it's probably going to continue to be because AI is a great thing, but also a little bit terrifying.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think when I was at Influitive, I saw the customer advocacy at the forefront, and now being at PartnerStack, seeing what kind of the rise of partnerships and go-to-market, and where the two come together is to your point, like surrounding your buyer with trust, right? It's ultimately trying to find ways to tap into those more trusted sources than sales and marketers that ultimately are losing trust, that they have one job, and that's to help sell as much of their company's software or solution as much as possible. And it's hard for them to be fully trusted when they have that. So I think surrounding the buyer with trust from other people that are more trusted, but it seems to be increasingly where things are headed.
Yeah. Sellers and marketers, like, as someone who's done both, I hate to say it, but we're at the bottom of the totem pole with trust. I think we're like down there with lawyers and a few other professions, kind of fighting for the bottom. So super important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's found that in the survey study I did too. Just unfortunately, even sales references, because of that kind of cherry pick nature. And I think review sites are at risk of sliding down if they increasingly be seen as vendor influence, right? And you'll see more and more people just probably turn to other sources if that doesn't get shored up.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Yeah, I think we covered all things review, all things social proof. You mentioned that research study. If our listeners want to go learn more about that, connect with you, learn more, where should they go?
Yeah, so the site, it's B2B SaaS Reviews.com. You can subscribe to get a bi-weekly newsletter, but I'm also working on a free course that I'll be releasing, which would be an easy way to get a quick download of what most vendors need to know about reviews to set a strategy and not want to bang their head against the wall about getting reviews.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so for our listeners, I'll include those in the description. And Joe, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. My key takeaway is just around the ecosystem of social proof that's required nowadays. I am the ultimate skeptic, and I think a lot of us are. So, as a seller, just checking the box by getting some reviews isn't enough. Just getting some positive recs and communities isn't enough. Having some customers for reference calls isn't enough. It's really how it all blends together. So you have to think about your social proof strategy like you would your advertising strategy, and look at it as an ecosystem and how everything fits throughout the funnel. So if you enjoyed this episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. It really helps the podcast grow, and I appreciate it. And as always, I'll be back Tuesday with a new episode.